the goal in life for us with Jesus is to not go to hell for all eternity. It's to go to heaven to be with him for all eternity. Okay, so that's the underlying goal, supposedly. And then I read in the Bible and I look at like, well, there's new heaven and new earth. And I'm like, well, if we're all going to heaven, why is there a new earth? Yeah. What's the point of that? Are there some people that don't quite, they're the JV and the JV has to go to earth?
Welcome back to the Rheology Podcast. Rheology is a nonprofit ministry that is centered around rethinking, researching, and rediscovery, a process that dives deep into the depths of an intimate partnership with God through a concept Jesus initiated called ecclesia. We strive to cultivate an environment that is not only safe to question and seek, but also one that is founded on the truths of partnership, words of hope that were uttered from the lips of Jesus himself. So in this podcast, we'll question Christian tradition, we'll investigate God myths, and we'll listen to those who are stirring, questioning, and desperately seeking more of what God is doing in and around us each day.
Hey, everybody. Scott Johnson here with Rheology and the Rheology Podcast. And that's Brandon right over there. He's the producer with Rheology. And we're back for another little episode here of this mini-series thing we got going on called God, Coffee, and Questions. Brandon, what's your coffee? What you got going on over there today?
I got a cold brew today.
Hey, in the same place? Your same joint?
Same coffee place. It's balmy 65 degrees in Greenfield, Indiana today in November. So okay. Cold brew it is.
Cold brew it is. Well, I am not sponsored by, I wish. This is Tim Hortons decaf. It's medium. It's a medium roast. And I actually made my own cafe au lait today.
Wow.
Steamed milk, frothed milk, and all.
It's really fancy.
No doubt. And it's good.
I don't have
a hint of Nesquik in there too.
Of course.
Gotta have chocolate. It has to be chocolate frosted milk or frothed milk. Anywho, okay, so this whole thing is came about because you have gone through and still in the middle of your stirring, and you had a bunch of questions that you started like putting out because you're like going through this whole deal. I got some things on my mind, and we obviously thought this is something that a lot of people would definitely probably relate to, those people who are in the middle of questioning, and maybe even spur some people into questioning even further. So in that light, I thought I'd just let you tell me what we got for today.
Yeah, today is it's a real light question. It's an easy softball question for you.
Okay, lobbing it in there. Okay.
Whether heaven and hell are to be viewed as real destinations, like this kind of stems from kind of the upbringing I had and kind of a traditional, I don't know, semi-fundamentalist upbringing, I guess, where whether intentional or not, I kind of always viewed this as, hey, we're going along, living our lives, depending on whether we are how good or bad we act throughout our lives, and whether we accept Jesus as our Savior and believe in Him, that dictates to which destination we go, whether it be heaven or hell. And so it's just kind of this, binary type deal. It's either this place or that place that you end up. And the more I started digging in here more recently, the more I'm starting to question whether that's the right mindset, especially reading through like Paul, where he's talking about it more like the coming age and the current age, and how we're in kind of this transition period now between the two, and also other references to like paradise in the Bible, and it's starting to make me rethink this whole concept of heaven and hell. So that's it in a nutshell.
Oh, cool. This will be a 5 minute deal then. Nice. Um, yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on in the New Testament, and we blend all of it like really down probably to like what you're saying, right? The two places. We got paradise, which means heaven. Sure, right? It does, right? Or the clouds, all of that imagery is one thing. And then you've got like all the other stuff is the other. And I think it can get real, yeah, sloppy, real sloppy, especially for Americans. As we've said, right? We like to take something that did not originate in this country, did not originate in our time frame, did not originate in this culture, and we put some very rose-colored glasses on to interpret it. And so, again, can be very dangerous. I think this probably a good place to start would be to like what we talked about last time. What is the idea of what is salvation, right? And that really kind of like helps to put the fences in, the sidelines in on the football field. These are the sidelines, and we need to play somewhere in here. And so, as we said last time, really salvation is not about that. We're on a burning ship. And maybe to use the terminology we're going to talk about, we're not on a doomed planet, right? We're not on a doomed Earth, and this Earth is going down, and we're hoping heaven, aka the lifeguard boat going by, that they can throw us a line, and then we'll grab the line, and then we'll board their ship. We're out of here. We're out of here. We know that salvation is not that. And we know that salvation is really more about, obviously, the ecclesia and a relationship and a partnership and what God is doing. So that's probably the best foundation before we kind of go into this, because we've got to remember that what it is and what it's not, and that will help define this. So I've told you before, and I've mentioned this story several times on this podcast about my, what kind of like my original stirring moment was, when I was 15-year-old, and my neighbor across the street, my good friend Derek Willoughby, at the age of like 12 or whatever he was, just asked me a question on the basketball court of like, hey, hypothetically, you died today, would you go to heaven or would you go to hell? And as I've joked before, theologically that question's like completely incorrect. But that's kind of like the idea that like you said, we all have that kind of growing up early theology.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just because that's an easy way to convey it, or whether that's just the younger we are, that's what we take away from the more complex conversations. But it seems like so many people have that misconception that that's how it is.
And it is how it is. It's not. I wouldn't put the blame on us solely, because history has had plenty of opportunity for people to screw the crap out of this. I mean, it's been screwed up so horribly, and we'll get to some of that. So history's had has been a massive factor in this to really dilute the water, right? And also we do read in Scripture, like you just said. We read in Scripture, we look at things, we're like, well, okay, it's right there in black and white, and it gets to be misinterpreted. So I as well had this very poor look on this whole thing, heaven and hell as well, up until about 12, 14 years ago. Because for me, I'm like, okay, cool. Well, so the goal in life for us with Jesus is to not go to hell for all eternity. It's to go to heaven to be with him for all eternity. Okay, so that's the underlying goal, supposedly. And then I read in the Bible, and I look at like, well, there's new heaven and new earth. And I'm like, well, if we're all going to heaven, why is there a new earth? Yeah. What's the point of that? Are there some people that don't quite, they're the JV, and the JV has to go to earth, and the varsity gets to go to heaven? Okay, cool. Well, I need to work hard to be on the varsity, because I don't really want to be on the earth if there's a heaven. I don't know who would. So
varsity has never really been in the cards for me. by the way.
No, you're the manager. You're not even JD.
Forever. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, we'll get you a trailer on the new earth. How about that?
Okay. Yeah.
So Isaiah 55 and 56, Isaiah actually is a prophet, and he tells new things and things that aren't really known. And he's kind of God's voice to the people, and God says things to him, and he goes and says them to the people. Right? That's how that whole thing works. Isaiah 65 and 66 talks about new heaven and new earth. That's when God is telling him, and then he is telling the people. That is also reflected in 2 Peter. And 2 Peter, Peter talks about, he mentions this as well. Hey, don't forget, new heaven and new earth. Okay. And then Revelation 21 talks about it again in the kind of these end times kind of mentality, new heaven and new earth. And so therefore, again, how can we have a new earth? Why is there a new earth if the whole goal is that the good people go to heaven and the bad people go to hell? Maybe the new earth is the new hell. I don't know. And how come there's no mention of new hell? I don't know. So yeah, 65 here, Isaiah, the whole idea here is him is really in context. This is all him talking about the idea that I have tried, God's saying this, I have tried and tried and tried to get these people to just join me. And I've tried. I've extended my hand. I've extended my love. I've forgiven them. I've done all this stuff over and over and over. So here's the deal. What's going to happen is that I'm going to create a new heavens and a new earth. And the former things shall not be remembered or even come into mind. That's going to come into the equation here in a little bit. So this is the idea. This is the idea and the concept. This is why Peter talks about it, and this is why Revelation John, is writing his stuff down too, because he sees this stuff as well. So the interesting thing is that like in all of the New Testament, the phrase or the idea of going to heaven is not mentioned not once in the New Testament. Nowhere. Now going to hell is well, we need to kind of like dissect that a little bit, because it's not quite the idea of what we think. So let's look at some of these words together, because I think that will really help like start to make some sense here. So let's look at the word hell. And the word hell in the New Testament, if you just go and look at the Greek word for hell is the word Gehenna. And we call it Gehenna or Gehenna, and Gehenna or Gehenna is actually a real place. It's a place called the Valley of Hinnom, Hinnom, and it was just south of Jerusalem. And in the Old Testament days, the Valley of Gehenna was used, and you can see this and find this and look it up in like the Chronicles or First, Second Chronicles, First, Second Kings, which are very basically is very similar books there, kind of told from history in a different perspective. But anyhow, this valley, the Valley of Hinnom, was actually a place where they made human sacrifices and stuff like that to pagan gods. So it was known as a really, really horrible place. And it was kind of known to be like an eternal flame kind of mentality. Oddly enough, that makes me think of the Bengals immediately. I don't think they were singing about this place. The eternal flame is an idea that like fires were burning all the time. That's how many sacrifices, human sacrifices, they were making. So there was probably this folklore and idea that like stay away from that valley at all costs. Keep your children away from that valley. Steer clear of the valley. Valley is a very, very, very bad place. And so when we come to in Jesus's day, there were no, human sacrifices being made to pagan gods in the Valley of Hinnom at that point. But we do know that it still was a place of an eternal flame. And an eternal flame, and for this reason, would be that all their trash was taken and dumped there. Dead bodies that could not afford a tomb, because as remember, tombs were not just like everybody didn't just go have a tomb. Rich people had tombs, and they could put their families' bodies in a tomb. The body would be in a tomb for like a year or so until it completely decayed, and the bones were left. And they would take the bones and they would put the bones in a bone box, or what's called an ossuary. And that would be their way of like preserving their loved ones, almost like us, having our loved ones cremated and putting them in a vase or something like that, or an urn. Yeah. So those people who didn't have money to, what did you do? You're just going to leave your grandma sitting in the living room and let her decay in the living room? No. So the only other thing you could do really is go and take this body to the Valley of Hinnom, and they were burned there. So this is like think of it being like an incinerator for trash and dead bodies constantly. So again, in the Old Testament, it was a very bad place for one reason. And in the New Testament, it's a bad place for another reason. And there was also this mentality that again, some sort of like folklore, we won't go too deep into this, but an idea that, that your loved ones could potentially be resurrected. Now, not resurrected like forever, because like guys like N.T. Wright talk about resurrection with a lowercase r and resurrection with a capital R. And Jesus's resurrection was a capital R because he would never die again. But there was this hope that some people could be resurrected, because those things did kind of happen in Old Testament situations. And Jesus resurrected Lazarus, but it was a lowercase r. He would eventually die again. But the idea is that if you burned your body, and this is going to sound familiar because this is the same thing today. If you go and have your body cremated, people will be thinking, when Jesus comes again and he resurrects the dead bodies, you won't have a body to be resurrected.
Yeah, how you hear that? Yep.
And this is the same kind of idea that's happening in Jesus's time, of like, once your body goes to the Valley of Hinnom, it does not return. Why? There's nothing left. So there's a very finality of this whole idea and this symbolism, even though, yes, it's being used for trash and other kinds of stuff. But for most of these people, Hinnom, the Valley of Hinnom, is finality. That's it. Your body is gone. And so we have that. We also have, then let's talk about heaven, and the what I think what I have here is the Hebrew. I have the Hebrew first, and then I'll talk about the Greek. The Hebrew is Shemayim, Shemayim or Shemayim. And honestly, this word is a very generic word. It can mean a couple different things, and it can mean sky or firmament, which, like, when we read about the heaven being, or the earth being formed, that there's like this firmament, above the earth and surrounding the earth. They would have seen it as like that word. Shemayim would have been just sky. And it also is a very a generic word for realm as well. So we'll get into both those. The Greek is uranos, and the root word of that Greek, it means to cover or encompass. So that's the idea of like the firmament wrapping the planet. But for these people, even Hebrew people and even Greek people, Greek-speaking people in the time of Jesus, they would all think that, like, it's kind of the generic term for God's realm. This is where God lives. There were known to be like multiple different instances of heaven: a first heaven, a second heaven, a third heaven. Paul talks about going down to a certain level of heaven. He's just basically saying realm or dimension, We like dimension, right? We're multi-dimensional, the multiverse kind of people. So maybe we should use the word dimension. So yeah, here he says that I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up the third heaven. He's talking about himself. He was caught up in the third heaven, and he's basically he's caught up into paradise. And you and I were talking about the word paradise. The word paradise really just means garden, or more specifically, it was meant to be Garden of the King, which would be like where God, kind of lives. And in the Genesis, he lived among men, right? That was kind of the place where those two places come together. So heaven would have been like God. God's just a generic word for God's realm. That's where God lived. That's why they look at like the sky. And I mean, we think about this, right? God, why would you? We look up to the sky.
This is
God's
natural.
up there somewhere. And that would be something that would be passed down for a long time through history and folklore.
The thing that's been helpful to me is hearing it, because if you think about nowadays in our modern culture, when we think of the heavens and the skies and stuff like that, immediately what comes to mind is almost like our current view of the earth as a sphere, because we have pictures from space now of the earth from space. But looking at the time when the biblical authors were writing this, they wouldn't have had that vision in their head. They wouldn't even had that concept in their head. So when they're talking about the skies, they're just looking up, and that's the heavens, and that's somewhere where we are not, and the earth is where we are. This is where we live. So that makes
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like think of like clouds and stuff like that. Even today, if we would find an emoji for God, it would pretty much be a cloud.
Yeah,
and Jesus ascending, like just think of it like that as ascending. In Matthew 28, he ascends into the clouds, into the sky.
Yeah,
we talk about the man upstairs
in Exodus and coming down in the cloud,
right?
Tabernacle and stuff like that.
Right. Exactly. So really, heaven is a generic term, but we pretty much we tag it to God's place, even though it could mean a lot of different things. So like, even if we saw this Hebrew word in other sections, it could literally just mean the sky.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean, God's realm or God's dimension. So we have that. We have another word too that's like, everybody's like, oh, what? Where does this fit into all this? What the heck? So we have a word. This is the Hebrew, and I'll do the Greek as well. The Hebrew is Sheol, or we know it. We call it Sheol. Sheol is literally the underworld. Really, it's the place of the dead. And I don't mean the dead bodies. I mean, because we understand that we do have bodies and we do have spirits as well. And so, your body goes to one place and it's gone. And then your spirit, what was that? What happens with that? And so that kind of blends into our folklore of heaven and hell, obviously. So Sheol or Sheol is the Hebrew. The Greek is Hades, which is Hades, and they're exactly the same thing. Hades and Sheol are the place of the dead, and so therefore that's kind of the idea. Going to heaven or going to hell. Going to heaven is, as I said, is found nowhere. But we do know for a fact that you do have a body and you do have a spirit. We do know for a fact that in Genesis, when God created human beings, he formed them from two main ingredients, a dirt to make his body and breath to make his spirit. God shared his spirit with us by breathing into it. So there's two main ingredients here. So what happens when we die? Look this one up, Brandon. This is Ecclesia. Well, it does come from Ecclesia. Ecclesiastes 12. This is verse 6 and 7. And so this is really the only place in all the Bible that we actually get some definitive, hey, this is what happens here. So Yeah. So this is all talking about like, because man is going to his eternal home and the mourners go about the streets before the silver cord is snapped or the golden bowl is broken or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain or the wheel is broken at the cistern. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. So the idea is like our body does go to a place. We know that it goes back to the earth ultimately, and then our spirit can go to God. And what that looks like, I don't know. So if you wanted to say, and my mom died and now she's in heaven, you could say that, because technically you would kind of be right, because we just read that our spirit does return to God, and that's more of an idea of a holding pattern, because we know that also there is going to be a new heaven and new earth. So God's not quite done with creation. That's not the complete end of it. You just return there, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, we also see, Jesus on the cross telling the criminal next to him, "Today you will be with me in paradise."
Absolutely.
Not later, today. So
not later, today. Yeah. And so his body is going to be probably thrown into Gehenna. His body is going to be thrown into the pit of eternal flame and burned up. But that thief's spirit will be in God's presence somehow, some way. Don't know how. Have no clue. Zero clue. So so where did all this kind of start going like crazy here? And the reality is that most people realize, most Bible scholars and theologians realize that a lot of the whole mentality that bad people go one place and good people go another is really more of Greek philosophy entering into Christianity. It's like two religions kind of getting like blurring the lines, and it's like me taking coffee and adding milk to it. Some people would say it's a horrible abomination. We've kind of diluted the water here. And so since we do know that Christianity entered into obviously kind of born into a Greek world, and it furthered itself into Greek world. And we know for a fact that Greek traditions and Greek culture had an influence on Christianity as it grew past the first century. We know of people like philosophers like Plato, who definitely taught on this idea of destinations, of some people going one place and other people going to another, good versus bad, good and evil. And so even though we just read in Ecclesiastes that your body goes one place and your spirit goes to another, it doesn't say anything like, well, the bad spirits go here and the good spirits go there. Mm-hmm. No. It's only until Jesus comes about that we start to realize that there are, there is this concept, an idea of, a new, something new, right? Something new. And as we said before, in the last time we talked, is that the whole goal of this is to get back to the blueprint. That's the whole goal. The goal is to get back to the idea, just the concept of what you said a while ago, the concept of paradise. Because there is this idea of what's called duality or dualism, right? Where you have two worlds. I'm going to try to get them in here. You got one world here and you got one world here, right? And this world is God's world. We said this is heaven. This is his realm. This is his dimension, and it exists. And then you have the human realm over here, which is earth. This is human's realm. And these two realms, they exist, but one is better than the other. So we got one here and you got one here. And our goal is to go up to this one, and this one just be blown up. The reality is like dualism is not a biblical concept. A biblical concept are two things that are different, but they coexist.
Come together.
Yep. And they come together and overlap. And that's the beauty of the concept of paradise, or as we might say it, in the Greek idea, the concept of ecclesia, because those two things come together. They're not
the partnership
separate.
Between God and human.
Yep. It's a beautiful, incredible relationship that is, they are different. Those two worlds are different, but they coexist, and not just coexist, but it's like symbiotic. They work well together, and they're supposed to. And so if you think about it in that term, and then all of a sudden things kind of fell apart, now we have dualism, where we have two worlds. And God is ultimately, this whole time, all through the Old Testament and into Jesus, he is trying to get these two things to quit being dualistic and to get them back to overlapping. And so Jesus then teaches this idea of bringing this back together. Now, here's where it gets a little kind of fuzzy, because in the beginning, in Genesis 1, I think this is like super, super important. In the beginning of Genesis 1, maybe you can bring that up, because this is like super important. So right here in verse 2, the first verse is a statement saying, guess what? God created all of this. Okay, let's keep that in mind. God created all of this. Verse 2, though, there are two words here that are super, super important. The earth, and we just said it, there are two realms. God created both of them, but at first, this first realm, you know, this we've got heaven and earth. The earth realm was without form and void. The Hebrew for that is tovu ebohu. Okay, I'm sorry, tohu ebohu. Tohu ebohu. It's formless and void. And the reality is those two words really mean more of the idea of like a mass confusion, mass chaos, mass emptiness. And ultimately it's almost like Seinfeld, a show about nothing, no identity, no existence. It has no meaning. It is really nothing. And so God then brings this world into view, and he, those two things come together. And when they come together, guess what? Now earth isn't formless and void anymore. It's not without those things. It's not chaotic anymore. God is the control, and God comes into the realm of chaos, and he creates something. He creates a beautiful partnership that two things are meant to be together. And so that's the goal. And Jesus then is the final bridge, the gapper, that he bridges the gap of these two worlds being separated, and he brings them together. Jesus came to earth to, he's supposed to be called Emmanuel, God with us, and that's exactly what he did. So he brings those two things together. And so from here, he's still, working towards the end finality, as we would say. And so throughout, like in Matthew 24 and 25, 24 and 25 are always misinterpreted. I want to go like too crazy into this, but they're very, very misinterpreted. The idea here is this, and even Second Peter, and as we mentioned, Second Peter chapter 3, Peter is kind of like saying the same things that Jesus. He learned what Jesus said. He probably got it messed it up, didn't get it right, but then he learned. Okay. Something is coming, and he's not really talking about the end times. They're really probably more. Jesus and Peter both here are talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, which happened in 70 A.D., which was an incredibly horrible event. We won't go into it, but it's really, really, really bad. Some horrible, horrible things. The city was basically captured and surrounded, and they were in there for like almost a year. A lot of people starved. People were eating babies. It was not good. And so when you read Matthew 24, you're like, aha. Jesus even says, hey, it's not going to be good for pregnant mothers. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be unbelievable. They're talking about that event. But what they're trying to say before that is like, listen, here's the deal. New heaven and new earth are coming. Okay. And what Jesus is saying in like the early part of 25, I believe, is when he talks about the parable of I think it's 25, the parable of the bridesmaids, right? Yeah, here they are, the 10 virgins, the bridesmaids. This is all about a wedding. We talked about it last week, that there's so many wedding analogies going on here. So this is a wedding kind of thing. The groom has come, right? And you're going to be left out. And what he goes on to say throughout 24 and 25, and what Peter is saying in his letter, because the letters that Peter wrote were all in persecuted times, right? People were being persecuted. And he's basically just trying to say, listen, something new is coming and you have been invited. If you want to get in on this, you better do it, because some bad stuff's coming for you people who are living here in Jerusalem. Some bad stuff's coming, and basically your life could be ending. And the bridegroom has come. He's here. Do not be caught unaware. Peter says the same thing to these guys. Keep going. So these are really just more of along the lines of saying, hey, this isn't about these two instances are not about, Jesus' second coming and, the rapture, right? Which is what's called post-millennial dispensationalism. Say that 6 times fast. Which is this mentality that there's something, God is going to disperse a certain type of judgment or whatever at a certain time, and then there's going to be other things that happen. That's a whole nother deal. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. I don't believe that God is going to come and bring people and take them away from anything. I think what's going to happen is a new age will come, as you said, and a new heaven and new earth will happen. And that is the wedding party that's going on. And we're all invited to that. So it's not as if God comes and says, and I know there's a lot of language in here, and it's more than we can probably get to. There's a lot of destruction language and that kind of stuff. But the reality is like the destruction that's kind of talking about here is basically a finality kind of symbolism, right? That once this is done, there's no more second chances, because it's done. It's like you can't get another invite into the party once the party's already started. You already had one, and we want you there. God wants us definitely to be a part of this. So all of this is really to say this, is that once all this happens, for those people who are not, who have said, nah, I'm not coming to the party. You're being invited into this incredible relationship, and you don't want to be a part of this relationship. There will be a point where the relationship happens in a certain place, right? If you don't want to be a part of that relationship, that you will not be a part of the relationship in that specific place. So then what's left for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The answer is nothing.
Yeah. Makes sense.
The whole tohu and bohu is what's going to happen. Those people who do not want to be a part of new creation, what's left? Then it's not going to hell and existing in hell forever. No, it's not going to Hades or whatever and existing. No, it's actually not existing, because you have no identity anymore, because all identity now for any humanity is only going to be found in that ecclesia, that relationship. Yeah. And if you choose no, then there's no second prize.
Yeah. It's consistent with, I think it was Tim Mackey of the Bible Project. I heard him talk about paradise and how it was a sermon he was giving. And he said his conclusion was paradise is not a place, it's a person. Yep. And that person is Jesus, God. And so, you graph that back onto the descriptions of paradise throughout the Bible, and we see it. It's anytime a person is in the presence of God, they are in paradise by virtue of them being in partnership with God at that moment.
Absolutely. And I was reading something. I've been reading a book called The Dark Night of the Soul, which is actually a psychiatrist who is kind of expounding on the concept. Whole nother deal. But anyway, he talks about the idea that, God with us, God has always been with us. He's in us. We just, there comes a point where we awaken to that, and then we realize that. So there's never really, like the whole duality what I was talking about, like God is up here somewhere, right? Yeah. We're down here, and we got to figure out a way to get to him.
Yeah.
No, that's not how it works. God, that's not the blueprint. And I know that some people get really turned off because, like, how could a loving God create a hell?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the reality is he doesn't. It's not a place for. I mean, I know that there are words like punishment that are attached to this, and words like destruction that are attached to this. But it's not the type of destruction and punishment we're thinking of. It's not really God saying, like, hey, you didn't do it, so guess what? You get to go burn in an eternity in hell, or you get to be non-existent. The reality is like, I'm spreading the truth here about existence and identity and true purpose. And if you want to get in on that, cool. If you don't, it's like the consequences more than it's punishment.
That's the helpful thing I've heard is it's not God sending you, damning you to eternal suffering. It's him letting you live out the consequences of your own actions. In this case, your decision not to be with him. And so you get the results of your own decision making.
Yep. That's it. Yeah. You made your bed and now, that whatever. And it's a sad idea. And I think that's what should spur us on to love, because the reality is that we have tended to take this as an us versus them. Now we're on God's side, and now we got to go to the heathens. And the reality is like, there should be way much more grace and love involved in that, because none of us really deserve this. But once you say yes to this partnership, you're also saying, as we've said, you're also saying yes to the rescue mission, and you understand what that means. And that should really make us live differently, love differently, treat people differently. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't.
From the whole Rheology team, we hope these podcasts are encouraging and educational. Rheology exists for three main reasons: to reach, train, and equip those who want to go deeper with God in this partnership called Ecclesia. If God has been stirring in your heart, where you are wondering if there's more than what you've been experiencing in today's 21st century Christianity, we'd love to connect with you, to hear your story and help you know that you are not alone. You can simply contact us via the website, rheologylife.com, or reach out via Instagram, @rheology_life. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.